All right. The last study that I wanted to kind of describe for you to make my case that there are sex differences in emotion processing is referring to how we explain other people's emotions. We call that attribution, right? Like, how do we attribute emotions in others? People tend to attribute female emotions, displays of emotions or emotionality, to their disposition, and male emotionality to their circumstances. So they're much more likely to say, she's acting emotional because women are emotional, and he's acting emotional because something must have happened to trigger it. So this is I think it feeds into that stereotype that I was talking about in the last lecture, this idea that we think that males and females are substantially different with regard to emotionality. Women can't help it. That's just how they are. Men are only emotional when the situation really demands it, is sort of the stereotype. And so this study was sort of examining that question. And the title, I love it. She's emotional, he's having a bad day. Attributional explanations for emotion stereotypes. So what they did was they showed in study one, in experiment one, they showed the participants an angry male face, an angry female face, and then they gave explanations for what was causing this face, right? So he is looking angry because he was just insulted by a stranger. She's looking angry because she was yelled at by the boss. And there's all sorts of different scenarios, right? There's just like the texting situation. This is an experiment, so they made sure to give all different kinds of facial expressions, all kinds of different explanations for it. So we've got four different emotions that were being tested, right? So we've got different, and remember that we've got males and females displaying each of them. So we've got across the x-axis sad, fear, anger, and disgust. And then we've got, a male face displaying sadness in the striped bar. We've got a female face displaying sadness in the spotted bar. And so you go across and you see males and females at each emotion. And then on the y-axis is the number of times the emotion that was being displayed was attributed to a disposition. Well, that's probably just an angry person. That person probably tends to get sad easily, that kind of thing. Let's first look at disgust. I think that's an interesting one to look at because what we're seeing is really no sex difference in making it a dispositional attribution. I think that's one of those things that all of us know that circumstances really elicit disgust, but perhaps, it's still not zero though. They're not saying that it's never a disposition to be more disgusted, right? So, but that's the one that doesn't have a sex difference. The others, you see a sex difference. And what you're seeing is whether it's an angry face, a fearful face, or a sad face, the participants were more likely to attribute the female displayer as having a disposition of having that kind of emotion. So that woman is looking angry because she's an angry woman. She's looking fearful because she's fearful. She's looking sad because she's a sad person. More likely, and it was significantly different on all three of these emotions. So there's this stereotyped assessment that makes us see men and women differently with regard to when they're displaying emotion. And so if a female displays an emotion, it's sort of confirming the stereotype that women are emotional, right? And when a male displays an emotion, he's justified. There's something going on in the situation that would make him feel like that. There's old research going back into the 70s that has looked at adults and how they explain babies crying. And, going back into the 70s, they've attributed babies crying to girl babies who are crying. It's because she's scared. And boy babies who are crying, it's because he needs something. Like something's wrong. Make him stop crying. Baby boys wouldn't cry unless there was something wrong. Baby girls cry for attention. Baby girls cry because something startled them. because girls are fearful. So, I mean, it's something that we've known and that we see people treating babies, especially strangers. Parents are less likely to make that incorrect assessment of their own child, but parents will make it about other people's children. So, and then, grandparents will make it about their grandchildren. They see their grandson crying and they're like, what's wrong with him? Their granddaughter crying, oh, I know, it's scary. Come here, I'll give you a hug, right? And so from very early on, even people who have raised children or are in the midst of raising their own children will make this stereotype about other children, right? And so it's something that maybe we encourage. Maybe it's something just so robust that we don't realize we're doing it. I recall one time when my son was 2.5 years old and we had taken a hike and we were coming back and there was one of those, sort of pasture gates, that has the horizontal metal tubing kind of design. And he started to climb on it. And I was like, don't climb that, you're going to slip. And then like the second I said it, his foot slipped off and he landed smack on his back. So it just knocked all of his wind out of his lungs, right? So I got to him and I could see his just pure terror in his eyes. Any of you who have ever had your wind knocked out, you know exactly how that feels. It's terrifying. So I go, I know it's scary, but don't worry. It's going to come back. Just hold on a second. You'll be able to breathe in a second. And, I was trying to comfort him and rub him, trying to stimulate breathing and stuff. And my dad comes up and he's like, he's not scared. He's just mad that he fell. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. I mean, I knew that this is what people did, but I didn't know that like my parents would do that to my children. I was like, no, I think he's terrified. Look at his face. Like, how are you not terrified when you can't catch your breath? It seemed, now see me, I'm like, it's total circumstance. He is completely justified in his fear in my mind. Of course, had my daughter fallen, I would have also said she was completely justified to be terrified. But it's kind of surprising how, from the very beginning, we kind of give these messages. And where did we get the idea of these? That's a really good question, isn't it? I'm not sure. I can tell you that these attributions are observed as early as preschool, where kids will make these attributions about males and females, and when they see a girl crying, they say, well, that's because she's a sad person. A boy crying, well, he must be hurt. You see it as early as preschool, and preschoolers are 3 and 4 years old. This researcher who originally found that, Birnbaum, he originally found it actually in 83, then he retested it in 84, and then he started really trying to figure out like where'd they get this idea that there's different reasons for males and females to be expressing emotion, that one of them is dispositional and the other one is circumstantial. Where'd they get this? So they tested a bunch of different hypotheses in this 1984 study, and basically parenting differences as measured by observations and things like that with families, media portrayals as they went through and assessed really common at the time things that preschoolers consumed from TV, peer influences, how the peers talked about it, things, stuff like that. All of these played a role in helping to solidify this stereotype that female emotions are due to dispositions and male emotions are due to circumstances. So you can't say, well, I'll just parent different. Like I thought if I parented my children in sort of a gender neutral way where, my son's allowed to be scared if he's scared, my daughter's allowed to be angry if she's angry, like this is, I try to do that kind of thing. And, when you have grandparents coming in and saying something different, or characters on their favorite TV shows are doing something different, or their peers shun them for behaving in non-traditional ways, it's hard to kind of like, you can't just change one of those contributing factors. It's really just super powerful. And then lest you think this is all just American society, a lot of these things have been confirmed in research in other cultures. So it seems like this is a really common assumption that females around the world are perceived as dispositionally more emotional, and males around the world are perceived as only emotional when the circumstance demands it. And that when they do express an emotion, it's probably justified. All right, now I'm just going to give you previews on all these videos because, like I said, it's going to be a film festival for the rest of this like playlist, but I want to set them all up before you go watch them. So, one of the things that Paul Ekman is the most famous for is for coining the term micro expressions with a co-author. And a lot of people are like, that's the secret to figuring out the true intent of someone who's trying to deceive you. The problem with trying to detect deception through micro expressions is that they flash really fast. So I've got this really old video. It's unfortunate that now that Ekman has developed this whole like training program and stuff, he doesn't have a lot of these videos available anymore where he's sitting down and showing you, here's a famous person who attempted to lie and let me analyze it. It's really hard to get a hold of those. So I found a couple. He's got one where this one he analyzes Kato Kalin on the stand during the O.J. Simpson trial. This person that you're seeing right here was part of a study that Ekman conducted, and he'll show you a little bit about how these micro expressions flash. The problem is they flash in like a quarter of a second, and so if you're not looking at the right part of the person's face, you're not going to see it. And that so part of the reasons why one of the reasons why he's not Ekman does not claim to be a human lie detector. Other people have called him that. One of the reasons why that doesn't exist, and really even after really extensive training, you can take a person who's about 50-50 on being able to tell whether a person's lying to about 65% accuracy. There are people who do workshops and they'll claim you can get to 90% accuracy. That's an overselling of your workshop. Ekman doesn't claim that either. He's the one who says you can get about to 65%. There are certain circumstances that can make you a little bit better, but it's really, really hard to detect deception in real life. It's a little easier to after the fact, and especially if you know later what might have been motivating the facial expressions, it's a lot easier to tell after the fact, but in live, stream of consciousness, it's really hard. So the next video you'll find in the playlist is a really interesting one where, and again, it's kind of old. It's from the 90s. It was on a show called Scientific American Frontiers. And what they're examining is the role of deception in establishing yourself as a leader. And it turns out that male leaders are on average good at deception, whereas there is not as close of a tie for female leaders and deception. And it's possible that, being able to mask your emotions and those kinds of things are skill sets that go along with other leadership abilities. Or it's possible that the use of deception puts you into the leadership position, right? Like you sort of deceive your way into it. So I thought you'd find this interesting. There are a couple of different experiments that are displayed in this video. So hopefully you'll see how there may be like an adaptive value to deceptive qualities, right? Like being able to deceive might get you where you want to go. This one is a guy who used to be in the FBI, and he is breaking down some political body language that he talks about, what these gestures mean and, different messages that we may or may not be picking up on when we're looking at like debates or other things. So I thought you might find that one interesting because it kind of, sweeps out of that leadership video and right into this one. So it's a little longer and he's kind of dull talking. I have to say, like, perk it up, FBI guy, but he does know his body language. So I left that one in, even though it's a little bit boring. This TED Talk is talking about how a lot of these different programs for telling us how to detect deception, where, an averted gaze might be a sign of deception, or, rolling your lips in, and other things that you'll see in the deception and leadership video, that when you're dealing with a person who has just gone through a trauma, those symptoms of deception might be revealing themselves, not because the person's being deceptive, but because they've just experienced something traumatic. And so she talks about that a little bit, and I thought you might find that interesting, that, we have to be really careful when we say, I'm going to use these signs of deception in all circumstances and for all speakers or presenters. Then this one, I thought it would be kind of fun. This was it's a clip from a show called Brain Games that used to be on like 10 years ago. And they're going to have put these kids into a situation, and some of them are going to lie about the situation, and you can practice some of the things that you've learned about, micro expressions or, leaking that might indicate that the person's lying. So I thought that might be fun for you to try out the things that you've been learning. Before I let you go into the playlist, I just want to wrap all of this up from this chapter and talk about, or this module, and say, we infer a lot of information from nonverbal cues to emotion. There are, in fact, consistent sex differences in that interpretive skill, not necessarily in, the experience of emotion, but in the interpretation of emotion. And then we do have some things that can be cues to deception, microexpressions, body language, things like that. But really the most important thing to remember is you need to have a baseline for normal expression, what the person's normal body language is, because what you're looking for in deception is a deviation from that, right? So you need to see, do they blink their eyes normally a lot? Do they normally use a lot of hedging kind of phrases, or space filling phrases like and things like that a lot anyway. So now that's really not informative. Do they tend to look up to the right whenever they talk? Those kinds of things lose their informative capabilities if this is just sort of that person's speaking tick anyway. You don't want to, be influenced by stereotypes of what a victim should act like. If you come in saying a person who's experienced something traumatic would act like this, and then this person is actually acting a little bit like shifty-eyed or super uncomfortable, or they've got their arms and legs crossed as if they're, trying to deceive. It might be that they're just doing a lot of self-protection because of what they've experienced. And then finally, the most important thing is that, none of us, Paul Ekman, the guy from Lie to Me, nobody really is a human lie detector. There's no such thing. But we can improve our accuracy by learning to home in on these cues, and especially among people who we really know pretty decently, like our loved ones, stuff like that, where we know what their baseline is like. And then we can look for these clues to, them attempting to deceive us about something. So that's the big picture that I'd like you to walk away with. So enjoy your film festival. Hopefully you'll like all of the videos that I placed in there. And this concludes our course on emotions and emotional intelligence. I hope I hit on all the things that you were really interested in. And I had fun doing it. So thank you for listening.